Welcome, my friends. This is another episode of John Webster Film, and it's a really good one, or at least, I think it will be. This is going to be about the 2015 film Carol, and I am joined by the absolutely wonderful Emma Smith, who a lot of you know, and I think that as excited as I am to talk about this film, I guarantee you that she is more so.
I am. Yeah.
So, I just want to turn it over to you to start off. Like, what was your experience seeing this movie?
Oh, crikey. So I first went to see this in the cinema. It's one of the few films that I've first seen in the cinema. And I was just overwhelmed with it. It just gave me so many of the feelings, and it was so visually arresting to me. It was like one of the first films where I just sat there and was like, golly gosh, that was beautiful. It was also one of the first films where I actively paid attention to the score. So it just sort of came together in this really, I don't know, it was just such a simple and beautiful story. Just every element just seemed to be so wonderful, and obviously it's Cate Blanchett, so my queer little heart was like, oh yay. And yeah, it was just that was basically my initial take, was just absolutely falling in love with it. And I think I've seen it at least another 6 or 7 times since I first saw it in the cinemas, and every single time I fall back in love with it. It's just, it's one of my favorite films of all time.
Yeah, I remember seeing this in theaters at the time that it was out, and it really caught me off guard because, I go see pretty much all the awards contenders when they come out, because, in case people have not realized, I'm a bit of a film buff. But I just remember seeing this, and there's films that really stick with me, specifically romantic films, where it conveys that feeling of falling in love. And that's part of why I love Pride and Prejudice so much, because I think that's one of those films, but even more so Carol, because the entire film is just this progression of two people just falling for each other, and the sort of emotional rapture of that. And it really stuck with me then. And as much as I thought I loved the film, years ago, and I have seen it a couple times since then, but especially this most recent viewing, I just really fell head over heels in love with it all the more. And I think, without a doubt, it's my favorite film of 2015. And it's, after this most recent viewing, it rose considerably in terms of my top films of the entire decade, pretty much. So yeah, it's funny because I was just talking to you before we started about, what a good starting point would be. But now that we're getting ready to talk about it, I'm like, where do you even begin with this? Because, we can start at the actual beginning of the film, but there's just so many feelings that I have about sort of overall. But you know what? I guess we'll get to those as we go. The beginning of this film is interesting. I took note of it when I was watching, because it has a very simple main title design, and it actually, the main title pops up over a grate on the ground, which I thought was a very unusual and interesting choice, because it almost doesn't convey the romantic, sort of joy of this. It's like a very overly simplistic, mundane way to start the movie. And I think that's also in keeping with the point of view that we start off with. And you wrote about this in your notes, and I was listening to some interviews. The film starts off from a male perspective, which with one of Therese's friends walking down the street and coming upon the women, and it's a very outside perspective. But then once we, you know, move in and meet Therese and Carol, the entire focus of the film shifts. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, well, I think it's really interesting in the way that they were sort of playing with points of view in particular, especially because like the novel it's adapted from is very much sort of Therese's book. Whereas this, I read an interview with Todd Haynes, and he was saying that he was quite interested in like changes of points of view. And I think Phyllis, oh gosh, I'm going to forget how to pronounce her surname. Nage?
Phyllis Nage, I think is how I heard it.
Yeah, so Phyllis Nage also mentioned something about Todd being really interested in this sort of changing point of view. I thought it was just quite interesting the way that a lot has been spoken about and been written about this film being very much about the female gaze in particular, and women looking at other women in a women loving women film. And the choice to start that as, you know, a man walks into a bar and interrupts the women, I think is a very interesting and on the nose beginning to this sort of grand romance between two women. And I think one of the reviews I read was sort of it just like being an explicit wrenching away of the film from the men and giving it to the women as a sort of like, yeah, I thought that was quite an interesting take. But I just, yeah.
I just want to say hi to some people who stopped by. Steven's pop in real quick. He did tell me he was going to be, you know, working today. So I do appreciate you popping in, man. We also have Kate, Leaf. You know, I'm so glad to see you guys, and I do see that we have a couple more eyes watching the chat as well. So hopefully you guys will enjoy this half as much as we enjoy talking about it. I did make a note here just about, I know we're talking about all these, you know, sort of, you know, topics about the perspective and getting into the, you know, male versus female gaze and all that stuff. But I have to start off by being stereotypically me and mentioning the music that opens the film, because Carter Burwell's score it's funny because he's a composer that I've always respected his work, but I'm not always like a super big fan. He has a very distinctive style that that isn't, a lot of times it's not overly emotional, but in this film it's like it just really pulls your heartstrings from the get-go and makes you, it's this wonderfully, you know, romantic swelling, you know, theme that makes you just, you know, it sort of prepares you for what's coming ahead, even as we're seeing these mundane images that begin the film. I think it's preparing you for this great romance that we're about to see. Yeah. And it's a recurring, and the theme that opens the film is recurring throughout the film as their love theme.
Yeah. And I think I read Carter Burwell's web page where he's like advertising his own stuff. And he explicitly stated like, this is Therese's falling in love. Like, this is her first grand romance. This is her, you know, coming of age story and her first love as a part of that. And I absolutely adore, I cannot stress how much I love this motif, that they're leaf. But yeah, I absolutely adore the motif that Carter Burwell uses throughout. It's absolutely stunning. I mean, I adore string and piano music anyway, but in particular, like this, it just gets me every time. I think I was I was listening to the score and just crying. It was yeah.
I really need to take a minute here and just welcome a very good friend of mine, Laura, whose comment I have up here. I have known Laura since before the first Con of Thrones. We met each other in the Game of Thrones Small Council, and we have hung out at every Con of Thrones, and we've just had the most wonderful of times. So please, if you can all give a really warm welcome to her. I'm overjoyed that she's popping in for one of these streams. I sort of send her an invitation all the time in the hopes that she might swing by. So I'm very grateful and happy, and she's just a wonderful person. So it's great to see you, Laura. And okay, so moving on to the scene in which we were talking about, it's sort of really interesting the way it's framed, because we're seeing that sort of outside perspective, and we don't even see Therese really until the male character Jack just like blurts out Therese, it's like as about as obnoxious as you could really imagine. And then she turns around, but the sort of the tension between Therese and Carol in this, it's immediately palpable. You can feel it. And I think I read something that says it's as obvious to the audience as it is oblivious to to Jack. And I was really struck by when Carol gets up, and this is going to be recurring, the way she sets her hand on Therese. Hands are just such a big element of the. Go ahead. I can see.
It's just like the subtleties of their acting and reacting to one another, especially in a public space. Like the way that they convey their love for one another in the smallest of actions, be it like breathing when they've got their when Carol's got her hand on Therese's shoulder. Like it's so palpable, and yeah, it gives me the feels every single time.
Yeah, and this is going to obviously come back throughout the film, because you have, they're going to show us when they first meet, the gloves, which play an important part, and then as they're driving together, Therese will, look, not just at her hands and her arms, her eyes. It's so much of, just sort of just these longing stares at different parts of Carol is going to be very much visually, the way this film conveys, again, it's sort of that gaze. It's not just as much as it is totally the female gaze, but I also like to call it basically the lover's gaze, where I think no matter where you're coming from, it's like I'm sitting there watching this movie, and I'm in that point of view. So I'm feeling all that excitement and nervousness that Therese is feeling. And okay, so this is me just jumping all over the place talking about a whole bunch of different stuff. But I mean, and I've rambled on about that. Do you want to comment on anything I've said there?
Yeah. So I read an interview from Sandy Powell and Cate Blanchett, and they were discussing how they spoke a lot about erogenous zones, but also like the ones that you wouldn't think about. And So you can see a lot of this sort of lover's gaze in the details, like you were saying, in the camera work about what exactly is focused on. And it's things that you don't, like, popular, like, just what do you think about when you're in love with someone? It's the eyes, the lips, you know, breasts, bum kind of thing. But when you're actually falling in love with someone, it's tiny details like the way they wear their gloves, the way they position their hand, what, you know, the way they sit cross-legged, and things like that. And so a lot of the details and the costuming and the cinematography is focused on making sure that those lovers' details, like you were saying, the lover's gaze, is very much, you know, sort of self-evident. And it really, really helps to very strongly sort of place us in Therese's point of view as well, which is, you know, this is a very, from what I remember, I've not reread it recently, but The Price of Salt is a very Therese internal monologue-y book, which makes it very, very hard to translate that on screen. But I think they've done a phenomenal job of making sure that you're like properly within Therese's head as she just completely falls for Carol, and the other way around as well.
And I do think that I don't think this is me leading into a topic. I do know, because I've listened to interviews about it, that they changed Therese's profession, because a lot of it, the way they convey the way she sees Carol is through you know, her photography. And there's that wonderful scene, I actually have a picture right here where Carol's, you know, outside the car, and Therese just, you know, starts taking pictures of her, and it's the way that we kind of see what she sees and feel what she feels.
Yeah, I think it's a brilliant, just sort of a masterstroke on Haynes and Phyllis's part to make Therese a photographer as opposed to set designer. It especially for a film which, again, is very much this sort of female gaze film, to have a character who is explicitly doing this on a film which they must have known would have garnered the sort of commentary about the female gaze is, I think, a stroke of sort of, you know, meta that I really do adore. So.
Yeah. Then I have some notes here of, like, you know, my next note talked about, you know, the scene with her, you know, if you want to call him her boyfriend. But let's go back to that, because really what I want to talk about let's just get to the shop scene, because I just, you know, we need to talk about that, because just the way that, you know, first of all, it starts off, we see Therese setting up, you know, the train set before the shop opens, which is great. You actually made some notes about this, because, you know, she handles the dolls, but she's obviously very, you know, interested in the trains, and then that leads into her recommendation for what Carol should get for her daughter and all that. So,
oh, I can't remember what I wrote about the trains. I can't find it. Never mind.
Well, we can come back
with having a 6-page document. Yeah, no, I think I can't find any comments on the trains. We'll ignore the trains.
Yeah,
but no,
okay,
sorry,
then let's just totally then talk about the way that Carol sort of just enters into the frame, and we see her for the first time, and it's sort of bewitching.
Yeah.
The way they see each other, and the way the camera kind of, you know, Therese catches a glimpse of Carol, and then her focus is like jerked away for a moment as she has to help a customer, and there's just something about the way it's shot. It's that sort of love at first sight.
Absolutely. Like, it's stunning. The way that Carol is just such a visually arresting figure. Like, she's, you know, very striking against the dark background, with her sort of light coat and her bright red against all these sort of cooler colours. It's a really, yeah, she just cuts through this sort of banality of Therese's existence thus far in her sort of, you know, life. It's just being sort of working class and going into retail and maybe having some dreams, but, you know, just palling around with a boyfriend and her boyfriend's friends. And yeah, and Carol's just there, and all of a sudden she just takes up everything, just all of the screen, all of Therese's attention. And I do really love the way that the camera work, it very much like focus on Carol and then just sort of like, no, I don't want to talk to you about dolls. I want to look at the pretty lady, which is probably how I would feel in Therese's situation. But yeah, and the way that camera work in that scene just completely wraps you in Therese's point of view, especially when you're coming from the sort of you being an intruder with Jack in this love story, and then we're following, you know, Therese in the taxi, and then all of a sudden we're just drawn into her POV. Yeah, I love it.
Yeah, and again, I mentioned the way then we focus on Carol laying down her gloves and calling back just, you know, moments before to the hand on the shoulder. I think that's just such a strong, you know, it's building upon that sort of visual image. And there's so much just romantic tension throughout that entire scene. And because, you know, they're in, first of all, you know, there's many things working there. They're in a public place, and there's the societal sort of restrictions. And so there's a lot of, you know, I wrote actually about a later moment, but there's a lot of sort of what feels like coded flirting, as I put it.
So much.
Yeah.
All of the flirting. I wish I could flirt like Carol does in this film. It's a skill I need to learn.
And then even when, like the moment when Therese looks down, because I can't remember, she's filling something out or something, and just the way sort of Carol is looking at her, like there's this just instant attraction and, you know, and love that's almost, you know, immediate. And this is the part where I do my quote unquote John sigh, because it really is just beautiful watching this unfold, even in this early scene. And then of course there's the I like the hat moment that
Yeah.
caps it off, which is just like, again, it's the viewer being in Therese's position, being because of the way it's shot, and because we're getting these points of view from the characters, and, you know, especially Therese. And so in a moment like that, the way Cate plays it, and just the Sandy Powell's costume design, you know, she's just such a magnetic presence, and so we're falling in love with her as Therese is falling in love with her. And
yeah, it's such a, yeah, we're going to go through, and I'm literally not going to be able to like offer any kind of like flaw with this tool. I'm just going to be like, yeah, that was amazing. That was so well done. Yeah, it's stunning. And like, and this is just like the start of their like romantic and sexual tension with one another. Like, so later on, it gets just, the air gets thicker and thicker with it. And this scene is already, it's just, they've already got so much chemistry that you're just sort of like, okay. It's just, yeah.
Thank you, Jared. And for those of you who are not aware, many of you will have noticed in the Slack, the John sigh is now trademarked.
Yeah.
Okay. So, and let's go ahead and talk about Therese's relationship at this early stage, of the film with the various men she's surrounded by, because it's like I did get the feeling watching this. It's like, this is not a movie where I'm going to argue against the point where men are just awful, because there's this sort of oppressive, feeling when she's surrounded by all these guys, and it's like, just leave her alone, guys.
Yeah.
And there's the scene they're all at the movie theater, and it's just, you just want her to get out of that situation. It's like, where's the next scene with Carol?
Yeah, it is. I especially really find her relationship with Richard very difficult, and really uncomfortable, because it's that it's a really I don't know, it's just like a level that you feel uncomfortable complaining about it, because there's not much, but it just gets you, and you just feel really claustrophobic as Therese in this sort of dynamic with Richard, who, I know, he feels like he's very much just performing or saying the lines that you need to say when you're in love with someone, and he's not actually in love with or engaging with Therese in any way, shape, or form. He's just got this idea of who Terry is, and that's another marker. He just doesn't actually use her name, which she clearly prefers to use, because she introduces herself as Therese to Carol, and so that just strikes me as what her and Richard's relationship is.
Yeah, I find that really interesting, because you made this point in your notes about the men in this film. It's like they're in love with the idea of these women, instead of seeing them for who they truly are, and loving them for that. Especially Richard, I think I think he likes the idea of the relationship, and he is definitely imposing sort of this image of who he thinks Therese is onto her, without actually seeing her.
Yeah. It's like every time he brings up France, she's so reluctant. She clearly does not want to go, dude. Take the hint. She doesn't want to go. She's not marrying you. She's not interested. Just leave her alone. And he's there, and he's like, well, have you thought some more about France? She's like, too cold to think. That's and it's, it just strikes me that she is trying to say, she is a woman who doesn't know what she wants. She's very young in that sense, and she explicitly says that to Carol. But the fact that she doesn't feel comfortable saying that to Richard, and that she's just making all of these excuses time after time about why or what she doesn't want to go to France with Richard for, sort of, I think says a lot about sort of their dynamic, and I don't like Richard much.
And I love that it comes back when she's talking about she has money saved up to go away,
and she's like, I have money. Oh shit, saved up. It's very much sort of like, oh, I shouldn't have mentioned that.
It's like there you have it, dude. There's your final hint. Just and at that point, it's not a hint. It's just flat out. He needs to get the message, and we'll come back to that point, because that's later on in the film. But that scene is especially frustrating, just seeing his attitude, and so we'll get to that.
Before we move on to the next bit, I was reading an article sort of about the sort of interpretations of the costuming and things, and it's really interesting, saying how Richard is this big oppressive force in Therese's life, and his costumes has him very big, very wide shouldered, very very masculine and sort of, I mean, Rooney Mara is only minuscule. So yes, you do. But yeah, it sort of exaggerates that sort of the power dynamics and the oppressiveness that Richard's relationship represents to Therese. And yeah, it's very much, I don't like Richard.
Really? He seems like such a likable guy. Yeah, I just want to say hi to Dan. I see he's popped up in the chat. And yeah, Dan, I mean, I feel like we're sort of inherently talking about the screenplay the whole time just because we're gushing about the story overall. But yeah, it's... I think the screenplay is great. I mean, it's a fantastic screenplay. And maybe you can speak more to this because you've read the book, which I sadly haven't. But you talked a bit about how the point of view of the book is entirely from Therese's point of view, and a film can't really do that.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I mean, it can, but this movie chooses not to, and I think it's the right decision. Because there's shifting perspective, and we start off through Therese's point of view. I mean, after the opening, but then as the story carries on, we very much get Carol's perspective as well.
Yeah, I think Phyllis Nage was saying this, like that. Carol in the books is very much sort of shadowy figure, very much like a woman that you project your own romance onto. You don't get particularly like that much information about her. Whereas, yeah, like you say, the film has this sort of changing point of view, and I think sort of fleshing out Carol as a person, and sort of showing her vulnerabilities as well, especially sort of towards the end of the film, and seeing the sort of flipping of the power dynamics between sort of a really, uncertain coming of age Therese and a sort of worldly Carol. You then have a sort of Carol who is worldly inexperienced, but she's had her life turned upside down and she's finding her feet and she's got a bunch of new things going on for herself and she's really unsure. Versus Therese, who's now like fully blossomed into like a young woman. She's going after her career, having, grown from this experience with Carol. So I think the way that dynamic works, like showing the two women's vulnerabilities, I think for me just really, really enhanced the experience of watching the film and made it.
And yeah. Lady Starfall, yes, and in fact she was, because there's the relationship with Abby,
mm-hmm.
who she's been friends with all her life, but about 5 years prior they started engaging in a romantic relationship. Now, again, I sort of lean on you for this, Emma, because you've read the book and perhaps it goes a bit more into her past. I don't know.
I can't remember. This is shameful. Never mind. But no, she definitely is attracted to women beforehand because the Abby relationship is also there in the books. What I find really interesting about the books is there is a bisexual reading of Carol that you can make, because she explicitly says, so her and Therese have this discussion about having sex, and in the books Therese isn't a virgin, and so Carol and Therese have this discussion about sex, and Therese has never enjoyed having sex with men, whereas Carol says no, it is and can be an enjoyable experience with the right man. Which is very... I could just be reading too much into this because I'm bi and love Carol and want her to be like me and me to be like her. But the book, you can definitely infer this kind of bisexuality onto Carol, at least, in terms of sexual attraction, maybe not romantic. But, Patricia Highsmith herself, I think explicitly identified as lesbian, so I feel like maybe I'm just reading too much into that. But then again, the book, she identified as Therese more, so she might be saying something else about Carol in the book. But anyway, that's a very different topic.
Yeah, but no, I think it is interesting because as someone who hasn't read the book and, you know, is, you know, came to this film just on its own terms, I see the relationship between Carol and Harge as something that obviously is, you know, they've long since soured against each other, but you wonder if there was a love there, or and whether Carol was in fact attracted to him, or if it was a marriage of sort of societal pressure. So, and it's not explicitly really said.
Yeah. My very limited memory of the book does not glean any further information on that one, I'm afraid. But I think their relationship has soured so much that I feel like maybe there had to have been something there before. But again, like Harge is very much like, I think in the books, she says that Harge married her for appearances. She sort of was like, I've never done anything to embarrass him socially, so that's why he still wants to stay in this marriage, kind of thing. Which that actually makes it sound a lot more like it's a sort of high society kind of for appearances marriage.
Yeah. And I think for me, and see, and I'm sort of conflicted on this because also I'm really a fan of Kyle Chandler, so I see him in a movie and I want him to be, you know, the least bit shitty that he can be, even in the face of, you know, some of the stuff he does and says in this movie. He does some pretty crappy things, which would be an understatement. But at the same time, I do like the portrayal of him as someone who, you know, whether he's actually sees Carol for who she is, which, you know, is certainly, you can make an argument, you know, that he does not. But I think deep down he does at least feel that he loves her, and you can sort of see the pain that he's going through even as he deals with it in very bad ways. And I think it's an interesting portrayal, and I think, you know, Chandler is quite good in the role.
Yeah. And not to go too far down the sort of empathy route, but so she was Phyllis Nage, when she was writing the screenplay, was careful to try and make sure that he wasn't just a straight up villain. Like, he wasn't just the bad guy. He was very much a man who was, you know, experiencing pain and in some kind of conflict. But, you know, he is, in my view, really, really awful.
Yeah.
Just the worst.
I mean, but I think
I don't like him either.
Yeah, I think in a lot of ways the fact that we're allowed to see him as a human being just makes it all the worse, the crappy stuff that he does, because, you know, if you're a two-dimensional villain, I think the audience expects that of you. It's sort of all the worse because we see him sort of emotionally wounded at times. I mean, I'm thinking really of when he sees, you know, Therese over at the house, and his anger really boils over. And in that scene, something that stuck out to me is when he's under the sink and he like bangs his head or something, and like all his frustration comes out in that moment. So I think it's good from a screenwriting point of view that we get to see him just as not a two-dimensional villain, but as someone who's sort of grappling with, you know, and dealing very badly with the situation that he's presented with. Yeah. Anyway, so that's enough talk about Harge, because that's more time than I wanted to devote to him. But yeah, so and we have sort of talked about him at the house, so we'll just skip over that when we get to that point.
Okay.
But I really just love when, actually, I'm getting ahead of myself. See, I tend to get excited and then I move forward too much. There's the lunch date, which you know, we simply have to talk about. Again, it's the flirting that's going on in this scene, and the way they say each other's names.
Oh my god! Like, I've like literally got a love the way that Cate Blanchett rolls Therese Belivet just so luxuriously. Like, it was just gets me every time. Like, she like properly gets into that name. It's yeah.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Sorry, I was just in response to that Laura message that you pulled up about Richard. I don't know if Laura's read the book or not, but in the book, so Richard is a lot more sympathetic in the film than in the book, in my opinion, because Richard in the book is vitriolically homophobic, and it's really vile. So that influences a lot of my dislike for Richard, is that I've read that and I'm just like, you evil homophobic person, you. Which, yeah, it's very not good.
Yeah, and I feel like he's unlikable enough as it is in the film. So, because he's, you know, I really do kind of just want to smack him at various different points, and maybe piling on even more, you know, absolutely horrible character traits. It may be a bit unnecessary, but yeah, I feel like when I read the book, I'll probably want to reach through the pages and just strangle him.
Yeah, you definitely will.
There's another moment in their lunch date that I simply, again, the tension when Carol is sort of casually inviting Therese to come over. And the way she's sort of nervously asking him, and she's like, would you like to come and visit me this Sunday? And the way Therese responds, yes. Like, yeah, it's enough to drive you crazy. It really is.
It is. Like, I just like fan myself when I see that scene. I'm like, oh, crikey. Like, it's that there is so much like tension and implication that is just, yeah, it's just incredible. And the way like that scene like has Carol like smoking so much, it's just this very obvious sort of smoking a sexual innuendo kind of thing, is very much yeah, this entire scene is just I can't finish sentences. It just makes me feel emotions that I can't articulate. It's just stunning. Yeah.
Yeah. If you guys came to the stream hoping for like an objective, critical analysis of this film, I'm sorry, this is not it. It's interesting that you bring up the smoking, because I did think about this when I was reading your notes and forgot to mention it earlier. I think it's really interesting that smoking is such an element of this scene in particular. And then you have the earlier scene in the department store where Therese flat out says, you can't smoke in here. And it's almost like it's in that environment, they're restricted from, you know, from conveying their feelings, from being open. And I do feel like sometimes I wonder if I read too much in this stuff, but I do think that that's played sort of on purpose.
Yeah, definitely. And that's a great shout. Yeah.
So, and of course that leads us into Therese hopping in the car with Carol as they head over to the house. And again, I got to bring up Carter Burwell's music again, because it's just scenes like this where he makes a comment in a lot of his interviews about how when there's dialogue scenes, he won't play music, but there's so much in this movie that's conveyed through looks, and there's no dialogue, and that's where his music really soars, and it gives you all, makes you feel all those emotions that Therese and Carol are feeling. And again, like I was saying earlier, visually you've got Therese looking, seeing Carol's eyes, and I was struck by I made the comment earlier about her hands, but it's not even like, it's not the predictable, oh, let's get a shot of Carol's hands again. It's actually her arms and it's her coat. And it's what you were saying about just taking in all of these details of these different body parts and things that normally would seem just like mundane things, but when you're in love, those are the things that you're paying attention to.
Yeah, and I love this scene and the visuals of this scene. Like, the score is incredible, and I love that this film is so dialogue free, so that the score can really come and come to the fore, and you can revel in the emotions that score brings. But I think an important aspect, especially of this drive through the city, is how dreamy the score and the visuals are, and how the blurring and the specific focus on like the wrist or the arm or the curve of Carol's smile. It makes everything, it just makes you fall into this sort of same sort of dreamy and overwhelmed state that sort of Therese is in, just in this enclosed space with this woman that she's just been instantly attracted to, and after the space of 4 days is like visiting her house. It's very much it sort of pulls you right in there.
I'd just like to make note that all of the Knights of Keira are in the chat, so just throwing that out there. Represent.
Champion of Kate.
No. Okay. I'll stop, guys. I swear. Let me. Okay. There's, you're talking about the dreamy quality of that scene. The shot that I really love, because this is again talking about sort of dramatic and poetic license. Obviously, in that scene, Kate's driving. So she's going to be looking ahead at the road, but there is this shot where you see her just staring at Therese, and obviously that's not necessarily a literal shot, because they probably would have gotten into a car crash if that was the case. But it's conveying that emotion, that feeling that they're both just entranced with each other, and it's in this silence that they're feeling all these things.
Yeah, and like the sense that the smallest or the most fleeting of glances, the smallest curve of a smile, all of a sudden they become like the most important things in the world. And like a glance out the corner of Carol's eye is basically like just being seen for the first time, especially like Therese, who sort of never felt seen before in that way. So I absolutely adore that. I think I'm going to be pulling from a bunch of different scenes for this next comment, but it's sort of the way that we are constantly the way that we are constantly looking through windows and looking through reflections, that is really emphasized in this scene as they're sort of in the car going through the Lincoln Tunnel, and we've got all the reflections of light and things. And it's just getting good. It's been good from the start, Beth. I'm just kidding. Ciao.
Hi, Beth.
Yeah, the way that the reflections are that you're constantly, even though you're in Therese's head, you're also like voyeuristically watching their relationship and looking at the way that the light sort of reflects on those windows is a way of sort of simultaneously pulling you into the dreaminess and also setting you apart from the sort of true romance of Carol and Therese. And I don't know, I just really like that interplay.
Windows and mirrors are such a huge part of this movie. Just obviously you have one of the opening scenes where you see Therese looking out from a foggy window, and then near the end of the film with Carol looking through window, and they're both sort of in one case seeing someone who looks like the other person, and in the other case actually seeing the person. It's a beautiful bookends in that regard.
Absolutely, yeah, I love it. And so part of the inspiration for this window reflections, mirrors theme was looking at Saul Leiter's street photography from the 1950s. And if you haven't had a look at that, then I recommend doing so. Like the visuals of Saul Leiter's photography come through so strongly in the film that it's really interesting to sort of see that. First time I've ever researched the inspiration behind the cinematography of a film before, but it was really interesting.
Yeah, I do feel the need to geek out on this because this is shot on film, and you had this written down 16 millimeter film. Yeah. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Which is like, that's not a common thing nowadays. I mean, film is rare enough. But especially 16 millimeter film, and it definitely lends a very specific look and feel to this that I don't think you'd be able to capture on digital.
Yeah, I mean, I've never specifically compared like media on which the film is taken, so that goes way beyond me, but I trust the cinematographer when he told me that, and you when you reiterated and pointed that out as well, because you guys know more than I do. But yeah, like I've got a quote from like when Ed Blackman, the cinematographer, was writing for IndieWire about it, saying that they wanted to reference the photographic representation of a different era, to have sort of anthropomorphic quality in the grain structure, which you can recreate grain digitally now, but it's pixel fixated. So whatever that means. But yeah, so it's about the film a bit. And yeah.
See, no, that's exactly what I wanted. I knew you had it written down, so I wanted you to read it so that I wasn't the only one coming off as nerdy about film stock. So that was me being selfish. But yeah, I do think there is a difference between the organic look of film versus simulating that in digital. And it is about the movement of the film grain. And yeah, okay, you know what, I'm going to stop nerding out about the look of film. We've covered it, so let's...
Would you like to nerd out about the color spectrum as well, though, which I've also got a quote about?
Well, now that you mention it.
But yeah, so specifically they were aiming for this sort of 1950s color spectrum, which was when they were sort of starting to experiment with color photography. And so they wanted to reference the Ektachrome. So with early Ektachrome, there wasn't a full range of color spectrum as there is today. It has a cooler rendition. The colors are less saturated and tended towards magentas, greens, and cooler hues, which I think sort of throughout the film there is sort of this emotional distance. You get that with sort of the pianos and the strings in the score, looking through the glass constantly, and with this sort of cooler color spectrum, except for Carol when she's just in red and just dominates everything, which I just really enjoy this sort of disparity between the sort of intense passion of Carol and Therese and sort of the way that everything around that simultaneously enhances that, but also sort of introduces this sort of layer of distance.
Yes, and something that really struck me, since we're talking about colors, so I'll go ahead and geek out a little bit. But what really struck me, and I don't know necessarily what the symbolism of it is, but the scene where they're off on the road together, and I can't remember if it's a scene where they actually make love or if it's in one of the ones leading up to it, but the room is very green.
Mm-hmm.
And it's very obviously that. So I'd have to think about more. I don't know what the symbolism of the use of that color, but it definitely stands apart from other moments in the film as far as color goes. But yeah. So they're over at the house. Harge ruins it. And that's pretty much all you have to say right there. Because
it's like Harge ruins everything.
It's such everything about it so beautiful and romantic, and then it's like this blunt force just comes in. And I was really struck by the difference in the drive up to the house and then the drive to the train station. It's like they're both so deflated, and then when Therese breaks down on the train, it's a mixture of different things. It's sort of the overwhelming sensation of the emotions of she's realizing that she's falling in love with this person, and then the fact that this absolutely horrible situation just happened where their wonderful date was just completely tramped all over and ruined.
I think so. There's a few different things that I want to mention about this scene, so I may need to go off. But so one of the things that I noticed was that even though like the house scene is so incredibly romantic, the class dynamic is evident from the start, because even though like Carol and Therese, Erin,
I agree there, and I have to say you're right. It's like, let me just interject here, because I did, like, when I was watching this movie, I mistakenly heard his name as Harv, which is a bad enough name. No offense to any Harvs, I apologize. But then I was looking online and it was like, Harge, really? Okay, sorry. That's my digression.
So true though. But yeah, so the sort of class dynamics, like Therese is a guest in Carol's house, but yet she is the one who is serving tea to Carol.
Mm-hmm.
And sort of this sort of class and power dynamics is definitely something that sort of pervades their entire relationship, in that for the vast majority of the film, Therese is the shop girl, the one with the working class background, the one without the money, and with, at that point in time, she'd not put together a portfolio, didn't really know what she wanted to do with her life. Whereas Carol is this sort of high society woman who sort of has the husband, or is in the process of getting rid of the husband, with the very nice job and the fancy cars and the big house. I think that, again, along with the sort of naive versus worldly character, I guess, it just sort of interesting that the premise of this grand romance is that sort of power differential. In I think that upon reflecting about sort of the class dynamics, I think that sort of cuts through like some of the romance of this scene. Like, obviously it's still incredibly romantic and is potentially sort of, I don't know, I never thought someone, you know, not wearing shoes would be as sexy as it is, but there we go. So that's one part of this, but it's sort of, there is this sort of undercurrent of sort of class dynamics that needs to be taken into consideration in the sort of power dynamics of their relationship as well.
I just want to say, you guys in the chat, you're making this stream even more of a joy than it would have been otherwise. So thank you.
It's great.
It's interesting. Can I make a confession and honestly say that probably on my initial viewing of the movie, and maybe even after that, it's not that I was completely ignorant of the class dynamics and the commentary on that and the sort of tension that brings, but I think like I was so embroiled in the beautiful romance of it that stuff kind of went over my head initially, but it was evident when I watched it last night, and that's really interesting, especially with this sort of flip at the end of the film where they're in different, not class positions, but in terms of where they are in their lives, and the fact that Therese has, you know, come at a place where she's self-assured and Carol is embarking on new territory. But yeah, I do want to pause here for a moment because we're an hour in, so I'm gonna do the mid-roll. I should say that we're not quite as far along as I would have thought, and I love that because we're really just taking our time and diving into all the wonderful the details of this beautiful film. But anyway, first, before I go, I just want to give you the chance to talk about what you've been working on. What do you got coming up?
Okay, so at this point in time tomorrow, but it depends on how Nessie feels, but tomorrow I've got a Unicorns and Elephants magical menagerie stream with Nessie over at The Unspun Yarn on YouTube. So that would be tomorrow, same time, 2 Eastern. And I've delayed it a little bit, but I also have my Song of Ice and Fire symbolism stuff happening in the background over on redmiceatplay.wordpress.com, and I'm currently doing a sort of an analysis of sort of broken motifs in A Song of Ice and Fire. So we're looking at that, and it turns out it's got a ton of last hero connotations, and the next essay of that I'm planning to release in a couple of weeks' time on Saturday. So
yes, and guys, if you want to find Emma's site and read her wonderful stuff, I have posted a link in the description, so make sure you take a look at that. And by the way, I should mention, because I haven't mentioned it in a while, if you guys check the description, I also make a habit of posting YouTube links for both the trailer of whatever it is we're discussing currently on a particular episode, and also what I've got coming up the next week. So for those of you who maybe haven't seen the thing that we're talking about, you can at least get an idea of it by checking out some scenes from it. As for what's going on with me this coming weekend, I'll actually won't be on Here Be Dragons because Stephen is going to be interviewing the amazing Pat Spinagle, who is just an all-around wonderful guy. So please, guys, check that out. Pat was one of the first people who really reached out to me in friendship when I embarked on the online fandom last year. So you guys aren't going to want to miss that. He's a great guy. And of course, Stephen is always amazing to listen to. So, and then, but next week for this channel, I'm going to be indulging in a completely obvious John Webster style stream. I'm going to be uniting with the Knights of Keira, and we're going to be doing an entire stream just on Keira Knightley. So I imagine about at most 2 or 3 of you will show up for that. But you know, Amy, Jared, and me, we're gonna have a fantastic time, and yeah, so that's gonna be a lot of fun. And then I'm working on some stuff to come after that, which is going to be really exciting. So stay tuned for further announcements. And I think that's all the announcements right there. Okay, let's dive back into Carol. The scene following Therese's ride home, she comes back to her apartment and gets a call from Carol.
Mm-hmm.
And again, such a potent scene. I did write down something that, you know, I just, let me, hold on. Let me bring it up. Now I'm navigating through my own notes. Okay, yeah. It's that when she says, I want to ask you things, but I don't know if I should, or something to that effect. And Carol says, ask me things, please. It's like,
yeah. Oh, yeah, it gets me. I'm just like, yeah, it's incredible. I just don't really have words. Again, this happens a lot. So yeah, it's beautiful, and I think is a core part of them learning to be around one another, in particular sort of Therese learning to sort of engage on this in a sort of grown-up romance. Yeah, it's really integral, and yeah, it's wonderful. And I read as well that they were on the phone to each other. Every single phone scene, they're actually on the phone with each other so that they can act.
That's fantastic.
With one another, yeah.
Because you hear all the time just about, you know, the director saying, yeah, haha, I was actually on the other line.
Yeah.
It's like, you know, something like this, you really want to know that they were acting together in those moments.
Yeah, and they were, and I think it comes through, like the way that they are so invested in one another. Like, it's just, yeah.
And I do like, you know, going back to when Therese says, I want to ask you things. It's again sort of that navigating of how far to go in on it, because everything has to be sort of, they're having these conversations, and it has to be sort of, you know, under the surface level of sort of two friends talking.
Yeah, it's, you know, queer romance in the 1950s when everything was illegal. It's constantly just speaking in euphemism. And, you know, yeah, again, it's like the actors are having to do so much work with their facial features and their gaze, and the camera work is having to do a lot to sort of imply the gaze at one another being a romantic one, as opposed to, you know, just gals being pals. But yeah, it's just, yeah, I'm just gabbling now. Take over.
Yeah, I feel like I keep wanting to jump right to the road trip, but we do have just a little bit more before we get there. Where Carol actually does have lunch with Abby, and there's that exchange where Abby says she's quite young. Are you sure you know what you're doing? And the response is, you know, no, I'm not sure. And she says, as far as knowing what she's doing. I never did.
Yeah.
And that wonderful Cate Blanchett, you know, smile. And
yeah. And I want to take this moment to sort of worship Abby for a second. She
go ahead.
is a brilliant friend. Like, she is the friend we all need. Like, she is just constantly sticks up for Carol and makes sure that Carol has what she needs, and be it sort of, you know, pushing back on what Carol's doing slightly, making her consider stuff, or, you know, being the person to pick up the lover from the middle of nowhere. Like, she's just, or like, you know, stopping your soon-to-be ex-husband from just like being a complete so-and-so. I really, really love Abby. And I think, yeah, she's a great character, and the friendship that her and Carol have is, yeah, she's wonderful.
And so at this point, unfortunately, I have to bring Harge back into the picture because obviously there's a very important story development that happens at this point where, you know, he's been trying to apply more pressure, and when he sees Therese for the first time, his immediate next action is to file an injunction and try and take their daughter away from Carol. And just watching Kate's performance as she is there with the lawyer, kind of going through this, of, you know, just sort of dealing with the incredulousness of, you know, a morality clause. Like,
yeah.
It's just, and she says, how is it, you know, taking, you know, her away from her mother, how is that in any way moral? And
yeah, the custody storyline is heartbreaking. And, you know, Carol isn't a queer film in the sense that it is like focusing on the aspects of Carol and Therese's relationship that are queer. Like, they just happen to be two women who are falling in love. But I feel like the custody storyline is very much, you know, almost one of the only aspects of the film that sort of brings societal strictures against homosexuality into the sort of main storyline. And it's so sad.
Yeah. So, and basically this ends up leading to, there's desperation on her part just to, you know, she can't control what's currently going on with her daughter. Her daughter's been taken away on this trip. She's, you know, and now she's hit with this injunction. So, she, you know, her very natural impulse is to, you know, sort of plunge forward with this new romance she's beginning. I think she needs to get away from everything. Before we get to that point, though, she does go over to Therese's apartment, which is an interesting reversal of, you know, just, again, it's very evident talking about those sort of class differences, of the very visual difference between Therese going over to her house and then now the opposite. And I do love that she comes over and, you know, her gift is, you know, a camera and all the film stuff. It's like, you know, and that's someone who sees Therese for who she is.
Yeah. You know, like, she just had a throwaway comment of, yeah, maybe I'd like to be a photographer. That would, yeah, that I can see that. And Carol's like, okay, I will get you a snazzy camera because I have the money to do so. And it's a really kind thing to do, as well as sort of, you know, this commentary on the sort of class.
Dan, we're going to get there. Trust me.
Yeah. Oh my god.
Oh.
Why are men in this film? Like, they just ruin everything.
Anyway. They really are all so horrible.
I mean, Danny's not too bad. But yeah. The rest of them are all. Anyway.
Is that the person who works at the Times?
Yes, yeah.
Yeah, but even he has got to make the horrible move. We didn't talk about that, but it's like he's presenting himself as sort of the nice, understanding guy who's taking an interest in her, and to a certain degree he is, but then he does have his clumsy build up to his attempt to kiss her, and then he does important. It's like, dude, just don't.
No. Yeah, like the first time I watched it, I'd not read the book at that point in time, and I was really, really scared that like Therese would be sexually assaulted there. I was like, oh my god, this is going to be horrific. And then it was like, it didn't happen. I was like, oh, thank God. But like the build up to that scene is just like so like, yeah. But he's fine. He deals with the rejection well, so it's more than can be said for Richard and Harge. So yeah.
So anyway,
sorry, I've just seen Amy's comment. Why are men? That's the question I have for every film.
You're not wrong.
Anyway, sorry.
Okay, so let's get to the point that I'm just going to forget going in chronological order. I'm just going to serve a big plate of the road trip.
Yes.
Because
all of everything,
all of it is just great. And it's all, I mean, there's somebody, let me see if I have any specific notes, because otherwise I'm just gonna I'm just gonna go to the main attraction.
So I've got one precursor to that.
Okay, go ahead.
So I was just really forcefully struck by how thick Carol is laying it on the entire time through their road trip, just like trying to be like, just kiss me, we can kiss, that's a thing that we can do, kiss me. And the scene that I think encapsulates that so perfectly was when I think they're in the really plush hotel, and they're trying on perfume and like doing Therese's makeup, and Carol's like, just put the perf with the, if the lady will be so kind to apply to her pulse points only, and then Therese does so, and she says, can you do me? Like, puts the thing on, is that just smell, just there, and like it's, when you see them pull away, it is very much like Therese has been like, I want to kiss you so much, but that would be weird, so I'm not going to. And Carol just been like, why didn't you kiss me? For the love of God, that's what I was aiming for. And like, you can see that very clearly in their sort of dynamic. And it's just, I find that simultaneously hilarious and also like, again, Carol's flirting game, where like, please can she teach me?
Okay, I just take the time out. I'm so glad you guys are, making all the OJ jokes. It's filling me with life. It really is. Okay, so I do have a couple of little notes here before I jump right into what, the big moment of the trip, which is just the feeling of excitement during this whole thing. That excitement of, let's block everything else out that's going on. We're going on a road trip and we're exploring this love that's building between us. And even if there's, Carol's the one who's saying, no, go ahead, go for it, and there's some nervousness on Therese's part, you still get this joy of just slowly building up to the big moment, and you can feel how the uncharted territory that this is for Therese, and And again, how excited she is. Again, this is a film that gives you that feeling of falling in love, and this sequence of the film more so than any of that, which is why the goddamn private investigator is such a bucket of cold water on this whole. Like, even before you know what his game is, it's like, who is this creepy dude? Get him away.
Yeah, it's just, yeah, he's horrible. Like, just the ice and the creepiness and he's so slimy when he's sort of trying to sell stuff in a way that is just like, oh man, it's just horrible. And it's so like invasive. I feel like, I don't know, I wonder if that's sort of, this thought has just struck me, so bear with me if it's weird or terrible. But it strikes me how, you know, we have the sort of first interruption where Jack comes in and sort of interrupts the grand romance of, you know, Carol declaring her love, contrasted with this sort of creepy, sort of invasive, like, interruption over their breakfast dinner. Yeah, it just seems to strike me as a horrible parallel. Yeah. I love that.
Yeah, it's interesting. The breakfast scene comes off as less creepy to me than the ice bucket scene the night before. It's like, and especially the first time I saw this, because I didn't know he was going to turn out to be, you know, private investigator, but there was still this feeling of, you know, you're not really welcome, dude. Just why don't you move on?
Yeah.
So, but yeah, that the first time you see him, the ice bucket scene, it's like he's got this really creepy, stalkerish.
Yeah, he's definitely got like a proper serial killer vibe, right? Like,
yeah,
just the creepy way he carries himself, and you're like, oh my god, this is horrible.
Okay. And throughout the rest of the scene, you know, just let's forget about creepy dude for a second. The situations that keep popping up, like, you know, first when they're staying in separate rooms, like there's a scene where Therese, you know, comes into Carol's hotel room, and, you know, Carol's, you know, in the shower, and it's just like that sort of, again, all the underlying tension. It's like, you know, just waiting for, you know, for it all to happen. And again, it's Carol saying, yeah, go ahead and make your move.
Yeah. So I'm just going to get out of the shower and get you to pass me something. It's just like so obvious. And Therese is like, here. Like, yeah, it's.
Oh my God, that's it, Jared. That's why he was especially creepy to me this time watching it. He is totally the Riddler on Gotham. Okay, that just makes even more sense. Hey, Helen.
Hello.
Oh, thank you for coming by. Which, by the way, I have to mention, Helen and I are, you know, have started talking about our next Tolkien stream. It's been a while, but like, I'm so psyched because, you know, it's like one of the great joys that I get is just geeking out on Tolkien with her. So, you know, hopefully we'll figure out soon what we're going to do. Anyway, so, and then there's, I want to scroll back up to in the chat to what Laura pointed out, which was where Therese does start to hit that, you know, that level of forwardness. There's one line where, you know, they're trying, you know, Carol asks for separate rooms, and, you know, and the woman offers the, you know, the presidential suite, and Therese says, why not take the presidential suite? You know, if the rate's attractive. It's just, again, it's like,
yeah, I do really love that. And you can tell, like, Carol is so used to sort of Therese's nervousness and sort of reticence that she is, like, genuinely surprised by Therese being like that. I was like, I will take that. Yes. So yeah.
And then there's just moments like when they're in the same room, the separate beds, and Therese is watching Carol sleep, and just that, again, it's that joy of just, you know, you're in love, so you just want to endlessly stare at the person you're in love with. And all of this is building up to, and like, this is where I stopped trying to take notes. I just wrote down love scene. It's like there's no way to really, you know, write down in words how utterly phenomenal this is. Just the beauty of, again, I talked about mirrors earlier. Mm-hmm. When we first see Carol in her home in the beginning of the film with her daughter, we see mm-hmm. her reflection and not necessarily her. So mirrors are, you know, just like the windows. It's a common theme. And the love scene, it begins with Therese sitting in front of a mirror, and Carol comes up to her, and Therese says something to the effect, you know, I'm always alone during the holidays. And the unspoken reply to that is, you're not alone.
Yeah.
And then the way that Carol just opens up her robe, and it's like, okay, I'm done hinting around.
I tried getting you to kiss me with a perfume thing. It wasn't going to happen. So let's just get undressed and see what happens.
Yeah. It's like now I'm just being as blunt as possible.
Yeah.
And I'm just going to let you talk about the beauty of the scene, because.
Yeah. I mean, I got swept away by it in the cinema. Like, it was so stunning. The score to go along with it, this beautiful sort of swelling romance and passion to go along with the scene itself was just so like overwhelming and striking. And there aren't many sex scenes that I've ever seen and gone, that was beautiful. But this is one of them that really, really struck me as very much I don't know, it just matched the music and everything, and I just Cate Blanchett, Rooney Mara, I'm just stealing the trademark sigh, sue me. Like, it is just so beautiful, and so every scene, everything that's happened in this in the film so far has been building to this like moment. I was going to say climax, but that's a bit weird. Building to this moment in the film.
If Erin's still in the chat, she's expecting that. So yeah, might as well go all in.
Yeah, and it was really, yeah, just stunning, I think. Yeah, sorry, I just saw drinking game loophole MS size. But yeah, it was. I don't think I can like articulate words again. I'll just be like saying half sentences to imply how much I loved it.
This is the point where I feel like I'm just going to repeat a lot of stuff that I've said. Oh, thanks,
Dan.
This is such a gorgeous, beautiful moment, and obviously it's a very important scene cinematically, not just for the film, but I think it stands apart in terms of your correct depiction of a scene like this, where it's, we've talked all along about the female gaze and the fact that this isn't objectifying to women making love from a male perspective. And And what's so great about it is the whole film has built up this soaring, beautiful romance, and it's put you, the viewer, in this position of feeling everything that they're feeling. And so much to the point that, you know, by the time this scene rolls around, my heart is literally beating out of my chest.
Yeah, I felt like a cartoon, like just a just heart coming out of my chest. It was, yeah, it just so many feels.
And again, you know, Carter Burwell's music. It's you know, his main theme coming in. This is the track on the soundtrack appropriately called Lovers.
Yeah.
And it just amplifies like everything you're feeling. Again, like major heart thumping, you know, all throughout. And the line that comes back in this scene, you know, near the end of the scene, is a callback to when during lunch, when Carol says, "What a strange girl you are," and she said, "What do you mean, flown out of space?" And I always found that to be a very unusual line. It's like, what does she mean in that moment? But it comes back in this moment where she says, "My angel, flown out of space," and it's just so heart-achingly beautiful and romantic, and yes, 1,000 John sighs all over the place.
If we actually had to do the length of sigh it would take, we would run out of stream.
Yeah. Okay. Aaron's asking the question. I haven't seen Portrait of a Lady on Fire, so
You should.
I
It's
can't
very
comment.
good.
I'm going to, as soon as, you know me, physical media, I'm waiting for the Blu-ray, the Criterion Blu-ray, and then I'm going to watch it.
Yeah, it was really good. I would say this love scene, because the score and the tension and everything going up to that moment has been like, this is the grand denouement of their love story. In A Portrait of a Lady on Fire, their sort of history is so much more mixed, and the score itself is lovely, but not as sort of striking and overwhelming as the other score was.
Now, see, either she just popped in or I hadn't noticed she was there before. But it's so wonderful. Thank you for stopping in, Nessie. I'm always happy to see you. And of course, another reminder, even though we just mentioned it, that, you know, she's going to have her stream with Emma tomorrow. So make sure you all go watch it. Okay, sorry. Go ahead.
But yeah, no, they are both wonderful movies. Would wholeheartedly recommend Portrait of a Lady on Fire. It's brilliant, very different, but brilliant.
Yeah,
I don't love it as much as Carol, though. But it is still very, very good.
Well, because, you know, on that same note, I know we were talking before in the Slack group where I was like, I think Emma will talk about, you know, the movie Her, you know, with us, and she's like, I won't have as much to say about it as Carol. So,
as we are an hour and a half into the stream, and like, what, maybe halfway through the film. But yeah.
But yeah, it's great because otherwise, like, if I'll full disclosure, everybody, I was counting on Emma just, you know, coming in and being able to gush endlessly, because otherwise this would have just been me going, oh, so romantic.
Yeah, I've tried to make sure that I'm not just thirsted after Cate Blanchett for the entire hour and a half. So I've tried to, you know, make that.
Leave that for the Slack.
For the Slack. I feel like we've sort of stopped talking about the film because we know what's coming next after the love scene.
I will say, Nessie, yes, and I've heard no end of complaints. So, you know, Amy sort of gave me some support, but then I feel like she gave into peer pressure. Anyway, okay, so did you notice I was just delaying once again? I found something else to talk about. Yeah, so, okay, so creepy dude turns out to be a private investigator who was recording everything the night before. And apparently, you know, Abby found out about this somehow. I realized this time in the film, I'm not really sure how that worked. Maybe it's in the book a bit more.
I can't remember. But in the book, I know that they get all the way to Utah, and like the investigator has been following them the entire way and has sent like multiple tapes or like back, whereas it feels a lot more compressed in the film. Bye, Laura.
Laura, thank you so much for coming. I do want to say, Laura, let me know. We actually, you probably heard me mention the Slack group. It's basically like a big private forum where we all get to, chat amongst ourselves, do like movie watch parties, thirst after our favorite celebrities, lots of different stuff. So if that's something you'd be interested in getting involved with, just let me know. And because, you have just been there for me for years now, and you've been such a good friend. So I am using my, and now the power's going in my head. I'm going to say my power as, co-owner of the Slack to send you an invite. So if you'd like to join us, please just let me know and I'll get you set up there. And thank you for coming in. Hopefully we'll see you again for another stream. Would be great. And, I miss you. We haven't seen each other since last year, and with everything going on this year, it's been sucky. So, but thank you. Have a great day. And, hopefully I'll see you again soon. Okay. So and once again, Laura's departure just gave me another excuse not to talk about what's currently going on in the story, because it's absolutely dreadful.
Yeah, it's heartbreaking. Again, that brilliant romantic scene ruined by a man. Like, this keeps happening. Yeah.
It is great to see her, though, like, immediately go for her gun in the car, and she's not screwing around.
Yeah.
Which is great. But the tape has already been sent off. And and the dude gets, if he was creepy before, it's like his creepiness is like amplified by like 1,000,000.
Yeah. And he goes so cold. He goes from being this really slimy, ingratiating, like clearly trying to work an angle kind of thing, to just, I've got what I need. And screw you and the way that your life is going to turn out now, because it's not my business. I was just doing my job. And it's like, yes, but your job is, in this case, evil. So stop. Like, yeah, it's sad times.
Okay, so then what follows is basically the farewell scene, evening, last romantic moment, at least, as far as we know at this point. And I do love that, because Therese feels she's taking a lot of guilt at this moment, because she thinks that, she was being selfish, and she says she never says no to anything, which I think she's being overly harsh on herself at this point. I do love that when they're in the room together, that Carol, says, you don't have to sleep over there, in the other, it's like at this point, there's no possible repercussions for them just being together. And Carol knows at this point that it's, at least for this stage of the film, that it's going to be the last time they're together. So
yeah, it's so sad and painful, and yeah, it's really, really heartbreaking. to have gone from this sort of high romance, everything is wonderful, we're in love with each other, to immediately everything is awful and all we have is each other, and one of those parties knows for a fact that they're not even going to have that anymore. It's just so sad.
Simultaneous sigh.
Yeah.
And so what happens next is, you know, the next morning, Abby shows up.
Woo, Abby!
And delivering some really sucky news to Therese and imparting a letter from Carol. But I know, I have a feeling that you just want to talk about Abby.
I had my little hero worship of Abby a bit earlier, but like, yeah, I think so when I first watched the film, I felt a lot more antagonism from Abby towards Therese, which, even though I'd already watched the film, I like still felt in my early rewatches. But this time round, like, I basically didn't feel any antagonism from Abby at all, and it all felt very much sort of Therese taking too much on herself, and as though and imagining a jealousy there that really wasn't. Yeah, so I think it's quite interesting for me personally, just seeing how my feelings about that dynamic has changed. Yeah. Abby's great. We stand Abby.
Yeah. Amy, I'm going to turn you into a hopeful romantic. And so the letter.
Yeah.
Just hearing that, and then, oh God, when Therese just, you know, is running out into the field and just losing it, and it's so heartbreaking because it's like they've just, you know, it's been all this build up, and they've just, you know, consummated their relationship, and it just all comes crashing down in this moment, and it's brutal.
It is. It's really, really hard, especially like just feeling the emptiness from Therese, and like the space of the film that takes up their journey out, and then the space of the film that is just Abby taking Therese home, is just so contracted, as though like there is nothing to bother paying attention to anymore for Therese. There's just the letter. That's the only thing in her existence, is just this letter. And it's so heartbreaking. Like, it's palpable, like, that her, you know, I mean, this is her first heartbreak. It's the first time she's fallen in love. It's the you know, first time she's had sex with someone in the film. And so for that to immediately fall apart is it's just really.
I like what you say about the fact that the time is, you know, compacted, because if you consider like how drawn out the trip was, and how we were allowed to feel all the intricate details of their courtship, and you know, and these baby steps, and then it's just so cold, this like, closure of all that.
Yeah, I mean, like, you think about like how, like, they met each other just before Christmas and slept together on New Year's Eve, and then were broke up like a few days later. Like, that's the span of this grand romance. It's like literally 2 weeks. It's minuscule, and yet it takes up so much time, and then it all falls apart, and then like the next 4 months just happen. And I think that's a really interesting use of time and storytelling to show like how much they mean to each other so quickly, as like a, you know, instant attraction, love at first sight kind of grand romance. Yeah.
And at this point, Carol's life gets really shitty.
Yeah. Oh, before we move on from the letter, there's just one aspect that I want to point out, is that, like, Carol's imparting all this worldly advice about, you know, it's better for us both, and, you know, I need to get my life in order, and, you know, I release you. And this sounds like, you know, worldly advice by someone who knows what they're talking about to this naive young girl who's, you know, going through things for the first time. But we know and we see later in the film that Carol herself is incredibly unsure about anything, and there is a falsity to this letter. Like, she can't guarantee what's going to happen, and indeed doesn't. And, you know, she says, I release you, and then, you know, she can't stay away because, you know, she's living against her own grain, to use her phrase from later in the film. And, you know, she just is in love with Therese, and there's no getting around that. And I think that the way that you know, Cate Blanchett voicing over I release you as Therese is surrounded by images of Carol. Like, Carol doesn't have the power to release Therese from Therese's own feelings. Carol, you know, this is very almost like self-indulgent, like, I will let you be the person you want to be. Whereas Therese, you know, has to make a choice about whether she wants to move on from Carol or not. And yeah, I just think, Hi,
Chrissy.
Hi, Chrissy. Yeah, I just really love the juxtaposition of what's actually happening at the end of that letter versus what Therese is actually doing, and she's just surrounding herself with Carol.
Yeah, it's one of those things where, you know, you have the older person saying, "You'll understand this one day." It's like the last thing that a younger person wants to hear.
Yeah,
because they feel what they feel in that moment, and no amount of, you know, let me give you some sage advice from someone who's been there, it's not going to register.
No. Anyway,
yeah, deep sigh.
Deep sigh. But yeah, and then Carol's life goes to hell. Like, yeah,
it's just so horrible. There is the before we move on to the details of, like, exactly like how dreadful her existence becomes, there's another phone call where Carol, you know, calls up to Therese, and Therese knows it's Carol on the line. Carol hangs up, and God, this just made me want to just weep when Therese says, "I miss you. I miss you."
Oh God, yeah, oh God. Oh, you're gonna get me crying again. That scene, it's so hard. Like, I watched that scene just holding my breath the entire time. Like, it is so, I know, it's just so, like, tense and sort of conflicted, and it's just, again, this sort of silence, the unspokenness of their relationship, especially with, you know, like, Carol deciding she's going to try to fit into heteronormative society because that's the only way she'll see her daughter. It's just so heartbreaking.
I think it's really interesting, you know, what we were just talking about with Carol's letter, where she's imparting this, you know, attempting to impart this sort of, you know, wiser, you know, sort of, okay, I just said wiser, but wisdom on, you know, on Therese, where she's trying to say, you know, we need to step away from each other. We need to make this tough decision. And then we actually see Therese managing to, you know, form some kind of life, you know, post Carol, and Carol just seems to be the one who can't deal with the separation. And not to say that Therese is. I think Therese is trying to be she's trying to build herself up in strength so that she can deal with it. Whereas Carol is just, there's the phone call, and then later when she's that scene with Abby at the house where you can just see like she's just, in addition to all the stuff she's dealing with Harge and her daughter and Harge's terrible, horrible parents, that it's also the separation from Therese that she's just less and less able to handle that.
Yeah, I think it's quite interesting to see, like, Therese has things to look forward to. Like, she, starts her career. She does the breakup thing where you redecorate your house and start wearing new clothes and put on new makeup. And she has things to look forward to. Whereas the only thing that Carol has in her life that is positive is Abby, because Rindy is still not around her. So she's given up so much, and it's all for nothing, because she sees Rindy like that one time, or maybe a couple of times since, stopping seeing Therese.
I have to say something about that scene with Abby. I love that there's two things specifically I want to point out. There's a moment where there's like car lights from outside, and she's like, who could that be or whatever, and and it's not really important, but there's sort of this, if you're a hopeless romantic in the audience, you're thinking, oh, I wonder if it's Therese coming to see her. And it's like, no, that's not this movie. At least, we think we're headed for just a full tragic ending. So that's the sort of brutal reality of that. And also it just speaks to her relationship with Abby and all that they've been through, that shot of their hands clasped together. I mean, that's just,
everyone needs a friend like Abby.
It's so emotional.
Yeah, I'm stealing your sigh, sorry. But Abby is a brilliant friend. Everyone needs a friend like Abby. And again, it's that symbol of the women in this film draw strength from the touch of other women, whereas the touch of men is something very antagonistic, or, at best neutral. So, you have Harge grabbing Carol's hand, you have Richard, sort of trying to grab Therese, or as they're having the argument about Therese going on the road trip in the first place. You have the hand touch on the shoulders in the restaurant where, you have Carol's hand and it's so emotional and it's so filled with just everything that's gone before and everything that, might have been, versus the touch of the man who's like.
By the way, I didn't mention earlier in the film because I had, touched earlier on about, the contact with the hands on the shoulders and stuff. But like when Therese is at the piano earlier in the film and she comes up to her, and then it's the same right before the love scene where Carol comes up behind her and, hands on her shoulder. So it's just a recurring thing. And it's that contact between them that speaks volumes when they can't just say plainly what they're feeling.
Yeah. The thing that I really liked about the piano scene is Carol touches her and she immediately stops playing because it's just too much. I love that. Happier times. Now we're on to the sad bit where they're not together. It's
like not enough before where I was stopping the conversation from moving forward. Now I'm actually backtracking.
But most of the women touching women contact in this is, romantic between Carol and Therese. So it's really lovely and important to see, two queer women touching one another and lending one another strength and friendship. For a film about gay women, it is so important to make it not just about gay women, but about friendships as well, because it turns out people are people.
Really?
Yeah.
Did not know that.
Shocking turn of events. Yeah. But anyway, yeah. So I love that scene.
Okay, and I just alluded to this a few minutes ago. There's the absolutely horrid scene of lunch with the in-laws, Harge's parents, and the talk about, oh, you're getting on with your doctor, I say, and then the whole, he's not a doctor.
Yeah.
Which is just her anger rightfully boiling over, because Harge's parents are insufferable.
Yeah. Oh my God, they're awful.
And then she finally gets to see her daughter, but it's under the supervision of Harge and his parents, and you just feel how restricting that is.
Yeah.
And it's just horrifying.
Yeah, it is. It's yeah. It's one of the few moments where, the society around them sort of directly intrudes on this romance, and in particular on Carol and sort of her identity. And yeah, it's really, really sad. Really sad.
And we do get this scene at this point where, after she talks with Abby, and Abby talks about how Therese has been doing, she must have started her her job at the Times and all that, and then we do get that scene of Carol in the car and seeing Therese through the window, which is bringing it full circle back to the beginning of the movie, in terms of looking through windows.
Yeah, and I think the direct mirror of the sort of framing device, where you have Therese thinking about Carol in the window looking, and Carol looking through the window of the taxi as well. It sort of shows us that sort of shift in POV, where the first half of the film was primarily a Therese POV, whereas now later we've primarily been focusing on Carol, and sort of her struggles in a sort of custody battle and things.
Thank you, Pedar. Thanks for just stopping by. I will say it's one heck of a film, so please do check it out. I dare say we'll make hopeless romantics of all of you. So then we get the scene with the lawyers, which is simultaneously like it's a moment where you're proud of Carol, and you can feel her finally standing up and saying, I'm not going to take this anymore. But it's still horrible, because she's making such a sacrifice.
Yeah, it is horrific that she has to make that choice.
And it's really interesting, because I have to say, it's a cliche in movies where if you look at, okay, I get to actually make a Keira Knightley reference and have it actually be relevant. A film like The Duchess, where she has to give up being free to pursue love because the pressures of the patriarchy won't allow her to even see her children otherwise. And so this is a character who refreshingly is standing up saying, I'm no good to my daughter, living this existence of misery. And so she says, I don't care what the circumstances are, just let me see her and you can have custody, just so that she can not live a life of absolute misery and have some semblance of freedom. It's, you know, we want it to feel like it's a victory, and in many respects it is, because, you know, especially for the time in which the book was written, and when you consider the society that they live in, you know, in the story. But it's still like she can't see her daughter unless it's supervised visits.
Yeah.
And it's horrible.
Yeah. It is. It's awful. And yeah, homophobia is bad, guys. Like, no, patriarchy is bad. Stop it. That's sort of the only thing I can really add there. The one thing I have thought about in
Amy, don't worry, you're going to far outdo me next week, I am sure.
From a sort of like more plot perspective, something I thought about this rewatch is when Carol actually made that decision. Like, we know she'd been sort of saying that she wasn't really sure how much she could take. But her decision seems to shock her lawyer, like, completely. Like, it's out of the blue in the middle of this discussion. And it does make me wonder, like, what was the thing that made her change her mind? Like, obviously it will be a massive culmination of things, but I do wonder if, like, her spotting Therese was her spotting Therese was like the sort of the thing that was just like, nah, like, we're just gonna say it, I'm gonna live my life.
Well, yeah, because I mean, I think you can build up a certain amount of resolve to say, okay, so I'm going to suffer for the rest of my life for, you know, for this purpose. But you can only go so far before something breaks. And I think you're right. I think it's seeing Therese. I just, at this point, she can't do it. And it is and again, it's like, you have to sort of, it's a balance where it's a horrible, you know, fate nonetheless that she's bringing on because of the restrictions of, you know, being able to see her own daughter. But at the same time, again, you're really proud of her, and just, it's sort of, you know, her saying, I'm not going to live my life restricted by what, you know, all these men and all these, you know, people are saying I need to do. It's in spite of everything, it does feel victorious.
Yeah.
Even though it comes with like major horrible consequences.
Yeah.
So anyway, let's stop with the sad.
Yeah.
Because we're about to enter into the, you know, some more joy as we close out the film, where we return. You know, Carol invites Therese to meet for dinner, and so we return to the bookend scene that opened, but the context is so different.
Oh my god, yeah. It's, yeah.
Because now we're in there with their point of view, and we hear everything that goes on in their conversation. And it's just, you know, it starts off so heartbreaking where, you know, Therese has been so hurt. And so she's got her wall up, basically, so that she's not letting anything in, even though, you know, Carol is clearly just saying, you know, forgive me, I want a life with you. Yeah. Please just say yes.
Yeah. It's the vulnerability in Cate Blanchett's voice is so palpable, even though, like, they're in public again, so they can't say what they feel, because, you know, someone could overhear, what they're doing is illegal, the way that they feel is illegal. And so she's, you know, floundering around for any topic of conversation as Therese is just stonewalling. And that is just so, especially in contrast to their first date, where Therese was just so open, just like, yeah, sure, I'll just come to your house. And Carol was just so like self-assured and just archly like, what do you do on Sundays? And you contrast it with this, which is like, you know, I think the only thing like Therese ventures forth is, have you seen Rindy? Like the entire purpose of their breakup. And then Carol has to be like, no, not really. So just reinforcing to Therese the entire thing was like utterly pointless, all this heartbreak and everything. It was just, on everyone's side, was just for nothing, whilst Carol's frantically trying to be like, no, it was for something because I love you. It's just, and the way that Carol's just like, well, that's that then, as the sort of nail in the coffin, as like Therese has just shut her down, and you're just like, oh.
And then but it's like, that's a moment of like, okay, that's all there is to be said, but it's not, because then everything you just said about them not being able to be like open and say what they want to say, throw that all out, because Carol just completely openly says, I love you.
Yeah.
And then comes our, you know, thundering oh, dunderhead, hey Therese.
You're just like, oh my god, no, let this play out, man. Read the room, read the goddamn room. And it's just like, no, he's not gonna do that. He ain't gonna do that. And it's just so powerful for Carol to finally come out and say, I love you. And again, the man comes in and just ruins this grand romantic moments. Yeah, it's just yeah.
And then when, you know, then we get to see, you know, what we saw early in the film, you know, once again seeing, you know, the hand on the shoulder, which is, I don't remember specifically, I think it's from a different.
It is. I watched these so much, and I have got each of the shots which are slightly different. So obviously when we're coming up to the table in the first scene, we are the intruder, Jack, and obviously this time we've got Carol who's walking to the table and sitting down, and then they have the conversation, and then when Jack joins the table and Therese says, this is Carol Aird. In the first version of the scene, we have the focus on Carol herself, because obviously she's the character that's just been introduced. And, you know, she, being the unflappable socialite, has just been like, quickly, like, you know, shuts down any emotions she might be feeling, and, you know, politely, in a very high society way, introduces herself and shakes his hand. Whereas in the later half, we see Therese's face as she's introducing Carol, and like her nervousness and the importance of Carol to Therese in this scene, having like knowing what all their interactions are. And then, you know, they have their polite chat, and Carol says she needs to make a few calls before dinner. In the first version of the scene, again, the focus is on Carol herself, whereas in the second version of the scene, the focus is on Therese, sort of her reaction to that as a very much like, I am quickly taking my excuse to leave because you don't love me anymore kind of thing. And then the hand on the shoulder, we get sort of Therese is shot from behind Therese, whereas in the later scene, it's shot in the front, so you can fully see like the pain in Therese's face.
Yeah, and it's great because, you know, we've just heard it, which puts on such a different spin on our perception of everything that's happening right now in the scene. So it's like we're seeing Therese as her head is kind of spinning.
Yeah.
You know, in the face of, you know, what Carol has just said. And yeah, it's absolutely amazing. Just the the complete shift and change in perspective and what we're feeling in the scene, what we know about the scene. And it's great because sometimes, you know, a scene, you know, in movies we get bookended scenes and the scene is just a repeat of what we saw earlier, just to say, hey, you remember that point where we came into at the beginning of the movie? Now we're caught back up on the other end of that. But there's actual reasons for having those bookended scenes where the scene is entirely different in context now.
Yeah. And yeah, I really love the shift sort of back to Therese being like, oh my God. It's brilliantly done. I love it so much.
So now we get a scene which I hadn't sort of remembered how long we kind of linger on it, where Therese attends, you know, a party get together with coworkers and old friends. And
that moment when you accidentally show up at a party and your ex is there with a new person, and you're just like, oh, awkward. Yeah.
And so, but she's also seen, you know, there's people around who are like in relationships, even yeah, I can't remember his name, but the least crappy guy of the movie.
Danny, I think.
Danny, you know, he's got, you know, a girl that he's, you know, sitting with in front of the TV. And so what do you think Therese is kind of feeling throughout this scene?
I think so. There is very definitely like a sense that everybody else is coupled up and romantic, and that must be, you know, like maybe like she must be the singleton in the friendship group, so clearly it wouldn't bother her too much ordinarily, but obviously she just had this declaration of love from the woman she loves who's hurt her so badly, which will definitely sort of play on her. And they don't make as big of a deal of it in the film, but in the book, like Therese starts to make a move on the woman that we see in the party who's clearly gay. Like that in the film there's a sort of an allusion to an attraction there, whereas I think if I'm not mistaken, in the book they sort of start kissing and then Therese is like, no, she's not Carol, kind of thing. I don't think it's stated as explicitly as that, but it's like patently obvious that she's sort of kissing this woman. It's like, not Carol though. So yeah.
I can kind of see, I mean, I can see why they left that out, because it's kind of like you're building towards this grand, you know, epic romantic reunion between the two, and you don't want one of them to have been making out with another girl, you know, a couple minutes prior. So.
Yeah, I think the book is a lot freer in its sort of sexual mores. Like there is very much a discussion of premarital sex and things like that, whereas this film like very much has, you know, it has Therese who's never had sex before, and, you know, Carol who, you know, they don't talk about sex like they do in the books and stuff like that. So it's just different media and different things.
Okay.
It'd be weird to just have that conversation like partway through their grand romantic like.
It's like, so what were you doing earlier this week?
Yeah.
Okay, so Therese ultimately decides to leave the party and take Carol up on her an offer and goes to meet her. Okay, so I've been saying all along that I'm pretty much in love with everything in this movie, but this final scene is just like the jewel in the crown. There's so much for a sort of film geek like me to sort of gush over in terms of the cinematography of the scene, the buildup with the music, the fact that if you want to go back and compare to the initial scene of the film where everything is shot very static, and then this scene, as it's from Therese's point of view, and she's sort of emotionally unbalanced at this point. And the camera is so shaky, and it's like you're in her point of view of almost not being able to contain yourself, being nervous, scared, and all these different things. And so as she's walking through the room, you get that feeling of,
Yeah.
you know, all this sort of chaos that, you know, she's, you know, feeling. And also I, you know, have to take note of, like, as she's going through the room, the view of Carol is like obscured by all these men walking around.
Yeah.
And
men just
like,
get in the way.
it's like going through a maze, like, you know, gotta, you know, get to the woman who's the love of my life, but we're going to have to I'm just gonna have to charge through the, you know, all the patriarchy and the prejudice and sexism and all that stuff. And then she sees Carol, and then as soon as Carol sees her, the camera work settles down, and the camera is still slanted to the side to give, like, she's still, like, it's almost like she's going through this kind of delirious haziness of not being able to keep, you know, if she's the camera, she can't stay up straight pretty much looking at Carol because she's so in love with her. But the camera actually settles down in terms of not being shaky. It is a little bit just to show that there's that uneasiness, but it becomes, you know, much more controlled. And so, and then you just have those slow, you know, the slow panning in on both of them, and
the
Carol's
the score.
The score and the smile, you know, when Carol sees her. And
yeah,
okay,
and
so
like,
that's my gushing about the scene. Your turn.
Like, oh, I don't think I can add any more. Like, this, the camera work and the score and the staring at each other and, like, the gazing into the camera so we are as seen as Therese is, and, like, oh my god, it's beautiful. It's just, honestly, oh god, like, I just can't. It just gets me every single time. Like, I cry so much, my heart starts pounding. It's the most beautiful, beautiful. Oh, and, like, the thing is, like, I really love this ending, in part because it has, like, quite different meanings from, like, now to, like, when it was, like, first written. So, like, now we have it as this sort of grand romance, but it's very much a sort of, like, a promise of things to come, and you know, version of, you know, not a happily ever after, you know, cliche type thing, but there's a promise of optimism there, and things like that. Like, in 1952, that was groundbreaking. Like, there was queer literature, but every single piece of it was, oh my god, the most devastating, like, tragedy imaginable, because you can't have books going around telling people it's okay to be gay. So to have the price of salt be there and there be optimism, like, for Therese and Carol to see one another and for there to be that promise was, you know, sort of basically revelatory. And yeah, it was a huge thing. And you compare that with, like, I don't know, something like The Well of Loneliness, which is, honest to God, the most depressing novel I've ever read in my entire life. Like, it's so just unremittingly, like, bleak. Yeah. Anyway, sorry, I went off a bit there.
No, that's what I want. Yeah, I mean, obviously, I don't have, you know, obviously I don't have the perspective to, like, entirely appreciate how much the story has meant to so many people, but I will say I do remember reading a lot about it when it came out, and I frequented one of the sort of Oscar forums, you know, at the time, and there were a lot of people, you know, in that group who were gay and for whom this film really meant a lot, and the book as well, and talking about that hope, that optimism at the end of the story, and how rare that is, and how important it was. And I just think it's such a beautiful and extraordinary note to end on, because it is the type of thing that shamefully we don't see very often.
Yeah, like, I mean, I think this this is a film that you get when basically every part of the story has been written and crafted by gay people. You get a like properly representative love story where the entire point is that this is a love story. It's gay, but it's a love story. It's not a gay love story where you focus on how difficult it is being a gay person in society, which, yes, we know, we live it. Like, that's we don't need more of that everyday experience. Please just give us a love story which shows us as people. And this, yeah, to me, does that.
I just want to say, Amy, it's okay. You can be honest with us. No one will judge you.
Day drink.
Yes. And so, that's the final shot. We see Carol and that, beautiful Cate Blanchett smile, and our hearts swell, and, and the music takes us out. And, I don't think I've mentioned Carter Burwell's music. So, but no, it's like the man's a genius. And this, I think without a doubt, it's my favorite score of his. He's done a lot of work, but but it's just breathtaking. I know you said you listened to the soundtrack several times this week.
Yeah, I did. I just constantly crying over emails. It's just like, yeah, it's and like I say, it was like the first time I'd ever properly paid attention to a score whilst I was watching the film. Like, it's not normally a thing that I pay attention to. Like, I'm very much a sort of generally sort of watch films for the storyline and the acting, but not much else. This is the first film that I watched where, as I was watching it for the first time, I could truly appreciate all of the elements that were going into that, like the camera work, the cinematography, the costuming, the score, in addition to the acting and the storyline. Was just, yeah.
Like that, as a film score obsessive, like that makes me so happy to hear. Somebody who normally is not paying attention to that stuff really takes note of a film score. And honestly, you couldn't have picked a more beautiful one to take notice of. So that makes me very happy. Dan's asking something. Now, I haven't heard anything of this, and I'm a bit hesitant to talk about, because it sort of seems like a cliche thing that would be asked by news reporters. No judgment, Dan, but I don't know about this. Do you want to respond to this?
So yeah, I saw this. It was Sapphic Underground, the video that Dan shared in the Slack group, or I did, one or the other. But yeah, she did a short review of it, and one of the points that she made was that for her personally, the sex scene didn't land for her, because she felt there was a bit of awkwardness there, potentially as a result of this attraction. Now, I'm not one to sort of comment on whether actors or celebrities are attracted to one another or not. So, but I mean, an element of that scene is that this is Therese's first time, so. For me, the awkwardness lands because that makes sense. Like that, someone would be awkward for the first time when they're having sex, especially because this is a type of sex that's never talked about. Like, especially in 1952, you don't talk about lesbian sex. You talk about men and women having sex, if you talk about sex at all. So it makes sense to me that there would be some awkwardness there. And for Carol as well, like, yes, she's more experienced and worldly, but, you know, this does strike me as she is very much in love with Therese, and, you know, the emotions and everything might, you know, make Carol's character more awkward, especially because, like, in the book she's very much a cynic, very much just like a kind of sex is fine but feelings don't exist. So for Carol to, you know, fall in love with someone, it makes the sex a bigger deal for her. That's my personal read on the awkwardness of the scene anyway.
Yeah, Dan, it's perfectly fine that you asked. I'm sorry. It's just I had never personally heard about that before. So reading your question, it just kind of came out of the blue for me. So, but yeah, Jared, as far as like the Oscars go that year, Ennio Morricone was nominated for The Hateful Eight, Carter Burwell for Carol, and then you also had John Williams, you know, the Force Awakens score. No shortage of great musical scores that year. I'll admit I had no complaints about, you know, Morricone winning, like, finally. And I do think that The Hateful Eight is an extraordinary score. But that said, you would have heard zero complaints from me if Carol had won. Let's take a moment to talk about the outrage that was the Oscars, because they failed to nominate Carol for Best Picture and Best Director.
Yeah.
And there was a lot of controversy about that.
Yeah. I just can't see why they didn't. Like, it's honestly such like a, I don't want to say like perfect, but like about as close to perfect for me that any film can be. So like, it's just, yeah.
I have to admit, I mean, granted, I have lots of issues with the Academy in general. That said, I'm usually trying not to get too upset, because it's not like they all get together and say, let's not vote for this thing or this performance. That said, it did kind of sting. It did feel very obvious that okay, apparently the movie was so fantastic that you nominated the actresses and, you know, and a few other categories, and it was, you know, considered one of the absolute best films of the year, but no Best Picture, Best Director. And given sort of, you know, what the film is about, and it seems like, yeah, it makes sense, you know?
Yeah. And yeah, I mean, there were like, yeah, I just don't know really what to say, because like, it's obvious that it's brilliant. Like, but I don't really follow the Oscars all that much. I was just mildly miffed at that. And then wasn't there some controversy over like Rooney Mara being Best Supporting, despite the fact that she has more screen time than Cate Blanchett?
Yeah.
It's just like,
they're
both main characters.
It's like, I feel like there's always controversy about that, because category fraud, as they refer to it, it's a common thing. It's usually the bigger name is nominated for best actor or actress, with, and the lesser known being, you know, Best Supporting Actress. I mean, I remember when, you know, I'm trying to think of what year it was, back in 2011, and Haley Steinfeld was nominated for Best Supporting Actress in True Grit. I'm like, really? Best Supporting Actress? She's kind of the driving force in the film. So yeah, I don't want to talk about it too much, but it is a sore point for me, and I can, if it's a sore point for me, I can only imagine, you know, how it felt for the gay community, because that type of thing has to. It seems like it's very obvious what happened, and I know that a lot of people. Again, I frequent a lot of, not so much anymore, but I used to frequent Oscar forums, and it was the same thing with when Brokeback Mountain lost Best Picture. It's like, it's so typical, you know?
Yeah, it's almost like there's some sort of issue around, like, I don't know, systemic underrepresentation or underappreciation of minority groups. Who would have guessed? Yeah. I mean, true, but, you know, it's about both of them. It's a love story.
Okay, hey, you know what? Sauron is not the main character. Just saying. So, okay, so yeah, I just wanted to bring up the Oscars. It's not, you know, specifically, you know, relevant to a discussion of the film itself, but I did feel like, you know, we should mention, because it was bullcrap in my opinion, and this film has, for me, stood as, you know, one of the strongest films of the past 10 years at least. And I loved a lot of movies in the year that this came out.
Yeah, this was a good
year. A great year. But this is the one that, you know, in case I haven't made it clear by now, it like tugged at my heartstrings in every possible way, and the filmmaking is on such a different level. Yeah. It's great. So yeah, lest I just carry on and, you know, gush sort of more and more and throw out some more superlatives. Maybe just mystery and Lord of the Rings. Yeah, could be. Do you want to throw anything else out there about the film?
My one final comment will be sort of going back to the sort of female gaze kind of aspect, just more sort of photography inspirations that the Lackman and Haynes used. So just in case anyone wants to have a look at them again, they're like beautiful photos. So there is Ruth Orkin, Vivian Mayer, Esther Bublé, and Helen Levitt, who were all sort of mid-century female artists that were street photographers, and they would go around and take photos, and it was yeah. I love The Big Short. It is also one of my favorite films, but I don't know.
Yeah, I liked The Big Short, but no.
Oh, I'm such a political lefty. I do love a good hubris of the neoliberal capitalists.
The thing for me, and I think it's fairly obvious by this point, but I'm very much someone who, like, I enjoy giving myself over to the really emotional films. So
shocker, John. Shocker.
Things that are gonna tug at my heartstrings. So, like, Carol is just by that very nature of it going to be on an entirely different level than a sort of political commentary film. Yeah. Which is not, I mean, obviously this film has its own political commentary, but it's not just that.
But yeah, I will post those names in the chat in case anyone wants to like have a look at some of the sort of photography inspirations behind the cinematography. It was a very good year for me, Aaron. It was a brilliant year, like best cinema year so far. It's 2015.
Well, following up on that, since I usually ask people like what their favorite movies are, I'm gonna put a spin on it and say the year 2015. What were your top 5 films of the year?
Oh golly gosh.
If you can't come up with 5, that's fine. Just
I mean, it's mainly I can't remember the years of stuff. I just know when I saw stuff. And that was like, I happened to be with a film geek boyfriend at that time, so like I happened to see a lot more films then. So we went to see Carol and The Big Short. Is Her from around then as well? Was it 2014?
No, I think Her was 2013. 2015 was the year, I know, Mad Max Fury Road came.
Yeah, went to see that. I really enjoyed that.
And then, okay, so The Force Awakens came out that year as well. I'm trying to think of what else there was. So it was Brooklyn. Are you a fan of Brooklyn?
Oh, yeah, I wanted to go and see it because I know I will be, but I never went. Oh, Inside Out as well, you know, for the children's animation kind of side of things. And I did really enjoy The Martian as well, like, basically. Yeah. Sorry, I just Googled what films came out in 2015. I was like, oh, yeah, that one. Yeah, that was good.
Don't worry, Amy, I'll fix that.
Yeah, I mean, that's basically like the way that I approach most films. I went to see Steve Jobs as well. It was okay. Anyway.
Yeah, it's fantastic year. You're gonna have to see Brooklyn. I'm gonna have to see what I can do about that. If it's not on a streaming service, I'll buy the damn thing for you.
It was on a streaming service briefly, and then I didn't get around to watching it then either because I'm not very good at making time for films. But I always make time for Carol because Carol is amazing.
It is. And yeah, I'm trying to think if I have anything else to say about to sort of bring it back around since the past couple minutes have just been movies in general. But yeah, I mean, I love it because we went through pretty much the whole movie and got to talk about a lot in depth, which was great. I'll just, you know what, I'll throw in just, you know,
Spotlight.
one more.
Sorry. Jared's just posted his top 5 and I was like, oh yeah, Spotlight was done.
Yep, that was that year.
And Ex Machina, yeah.
Oh, Ex Machina, yes. Which I think, guys, I do believe we are going to do that as a watch party in the Slack because I'm pretty sure it's on Netflix and that's going to be a must. I love that movie. And it's one of those movies that, you know, it came out so early in the year. I knew it wasn't going to be, you know, nominated for a lot of awards, though it did win visual effects. But that was the one I remember because Alicia Vikander won Best Supporting Actress that year for a different film for, I think, The Danish Girl. And that was one of those situations where I was like, no, she won for Ex Machina. Yeah, so as far as Carol is concerned, I'll just close out by doing one more John sigh. And, you know, if any of you guys have, you know, any last minute questions you want to throw out there about the movie for those of you who have seen it, I know a few of you have not, and I appreciate you guys stopping by and listening to us talk nonetheless. Hopefully we've encouraged you to check it out.
Yeah, I mean, we've spoken about it for about an hour longer than the film actually is, so yeah.
Yeah, so yeah, seriously, and you know, some of you guys were around for last year's Here Be Dragons Oscar stream, where I proceeded to talk in detail about my top 10 films of the year. And let's just say not everybody was thrilled with how much time I was taking to do that. But okay, so I guess we'll go ahead and get close to closing out if nobody has any more questions. We've gone about 40 minutes over than the usual 2 hours, which I am
sorry.
Like, no, I love it. And that's totally what I wanted. I was actually concerned because a lot of my streams have been about movies that are very complex and have a lot of moving parts. Carol, by comparison, is you know, I wouldn't call it a simple story in terms of the story itself, but in terms of, you know, structure as a film, it is a very, you know, it has a couple of characters, a very clear, straightforward story. And so part of me was like, are we going to fill up 2 hours talking about it? And so the fact that we've gone for 2 hours and 40 minutes is amazing. I love it.
Yeah. Love Carol.
Yeah, Amy, you are probably right, and the fact that Amy has written extensive notes about a number of Keira films that she's watched over the past week or so just tells me that I should let her go on for as long as she wants. But so, and that's a good opportunity for me to mention once again, in case anybody joined late, next week will, you know, same time will be the shameless Keira Knightley stream with my fellow cohorts, Jared Kozel and the lovely Amy, who enables my Keira fascination with no judgment, even though I get plenty of judgment from others. Okay, so I guess that will be it. Thank you all for tuning in. This was an amazing discussion. Emma, thank you for this.
Thank you for sort of inviting me on to just gush shamelessly about how amazing this film is and how wonderful Cate Blanchett and Rooney Mara is. I feel like I've given short shrift to Rooney Mara just because I'm so obsessed with Cate Blanchett. Rooney Mara is also amazing. But I'm just the thirsty.
Well, I think it's easy because, you know, so much of the film is from her perspective, so we can't really help but fawn over Cate, because that's how she sees her. So I think we can let you off the hook for that one. Yeah, the only thing I can say is I probably now want to watch the movie again since we talked about it so much.
Doing the same. I'm just like, can I watch it again? I'm like, no, I've got to prep for Nessie's stream tomorrow.
Oh shoot, that's right. Nessie's gonna get angry at me if I don't finish up the title card for her stream before I, you know, sit down for another watch. I swear, Nessie, I won't get distracted. I'll do it. Okay. So I think we should probably go ahead and wrap up now. Thank you again, Emma, and thank you everyone for tuning in. You know, any new viewers we might have, if you like this, please like and subscribe. And everybody, please share this video around, because this was a fantastic discussion, and I'd love for more people to have the chance to see it. And yeah, so that's it. I will see you guys next week, and I hope you all have an absolutely wonderful day. Bye.